lot of that has to do not with Republicans or Democrats. It has to do with Republicans and Democrats. Both people who have gone to Congress and spent too much money for far too long. As a result, Congress was faced with increasing the debt ceiling. And the question became whether or not it should be increased, whether or not it should be increased with a clean up or down vote, as many were talking about in January, whether there should be tax increases accompanying that, whether there should be spending cuts accompanying that, or whether there should be some combination thereof. But it was all working down toward an August 2nd deadline. The idea being that if August 2nd hits and we do not have a plan in place to address this country's debt ceiling, that it could have very negative impact on our economy. Whether that meant a default, whether that meant a down in the market, or whether that meant a downgrade in the market as we have seen. And so a lot of challenges that we faced to get to that part of the debate. Over the summer, negotiations took place on how much spending to cut, whether or not to cut spending. This past week, a plan was put in place that I actually voted for, and I'll tell you why. Number one, it does reduce spending. Number two, it addresses the issue of August 2nd, because I was afraid of the economic consequences of not putting a plan in place by August 2nd. People both on the left and the right said that the economic consequences of failing to put a plan in place by August 2nd could be catastrophic. Thirdly, remember the budget surpluses back in the 1990s, the early 1990s? Many of those surpluses could be credited toward two spending caps that were put in place. And so this bill actually puts in meaningful spending caps to cap spending. And it also makes sure that over the next several months, Congress is taking another look at even more spending cuts. And if they don't come to an agreement, then there will be automatic sequestration, which is spending cuts across many areas of government to reach those spending cuts for the second part of the debt ceiling vote that just came up. And I think another important feature of that was the requirement that both the House and the Senate vote on a balanced budget amendment. And so that will be a vote over the next several months. I think sometime between October and December, there will be a vote on a balanced budget amendment in the House and the Senate. Those are all important issues that we've been talking about, and I thank you very much for being here this morning. And with that, I'd just like to turn it over to you and ask questions. The first question, though, goes to the Democrat chair of the 51st House District, Bob Massaro. Bob is the Democrat chair of the 51st House District. Bob.
First, I want to thank you for coming. I wish you would have more talent.
Yeah, unfortunately, we only have one mic because they cross-communicated and had a little feedback this morning, so I'll repeat the question.
First, I want to thank you for coming. I wish you'd come more often, okay? Because we really do want to see you here and get our voices to you, okay? My question is a fairly simple one. We do learn from history, or I hope we learn from history, okay? And history shows that the only president that had less job creation than President Bush in his 8 years in office was Herbert Hoover. George Bush created 1.1 million jobs in 8 years in office. It takes 120,000 jobs per month just to keep up with the number of people entering the workforce. That's 2.8 million jobs in an 8-year series, okay? He created 1.1 million jobs. The tax cuts that were put in place immediately after he came in office were supposed to create jobs. So my question is simple. If we're looking at history, why didn't those tax cuts create more jobs? Under President Clinton, though, we had more. We had a higher tax rate under President Clinton. He created 22 million jobs in 8 years. Again, if tax cuts are the answer, what happened during those 8 years? And I'd like to just finish with one thing because somebody mentioned it before, you did as a matter of fact. The balanced budget amendment. It sounds wonderful, it really does. Explain to me how we would have fought World War II under a balanced budget amendment, or how we would have built the road system in this country under a balanced budget amendment, or for that matter, how anyone in this room would purchase a house if they had to have a balanced budget amendment. Okay?
Well, thank you. pleased that President Obama agreed to extend the tax cuts in the 111th Congress. And so the fact that President Obama recognized that our economy could not afford the largest tax increase in the history of our country was an important thing. And I think President Obama was right to do that. So the other thing, to answer the other parts of your questions, I think we need to get beyond blaming President Bush or blaming Republicans. Everybody's going to have a chance to talk, and please, if we can't have a meaningful discussion, then unfortunately this country's going to continue to have these arguments without actual solutions. And so I appreciate your passion, because we're all here because we're very passionate about the country.
You're right.
So
So
thank you.
answer the question.
And so thank you. And so here's what I believe. I believe that if we increase taxes when we're on the cusp, or as John Kerry said, possibly looking at a double-dip recession, then it will be even more devastating to our economy.
No.
The tax cuts are set to expire under current law in 2 years anyway, 2012. They are set to expire. I don't think they should expire, because I believe if we have the largest tax increase in the history of our country, that it will hurt jobs.
The Fiscal Commission was put together because the Republicans refused to participate and look at the big picture to determine where cuts will be made.
Give her the mic.
Give her the
Hey, excuse me 1 second. I really do apologize that we tried with 2 mics, but unfortunately there was 3 right between the 2 mics. I will give her the mic, but I might not be able to reach everybody else.
Alan has identified that in our tax code, there's 180 tax incentives that are given to the top 400 people of this country that they're using, that is taking $1 trillion out of our revenue. At the same time, our Social Security trust fund is being used to implement and pay for government. Why is it more important to give $1 trillion every year to the top 400 people in this country than it is to take care of our seniors?
And we passed a budget a couple months ago that actually took the first step toward tax reform, and we ought to have comprehensive tax reform in this country. And if that means getting rid of some of the loopholes, then that's what it means. And it ought to mean getting rid of some loopholes. If somebody owes taxes in this country, they should be able to get around it.
But what are you going to do about the disparity between the top and the bottom that keeps growing?
Yeah.
And that is part of the problem that is decimating our middle class and our lower income people. And we have children going hungry.
The question was, what are we going to do about the disparity between the upper income and lower income and the middle class? That's why we've got to start creating jobs and foster policies that get back to economic growth. And why aren't we there yet? Because I believe when you have regulations that are too burdensome for small businesses to hire new people, there's $2 trillion in capital sitting on the sidelines that people are afraid to invest.
We have to have demand, and there is no demand when our people have their wages held down. They've lost 5% in the last 10 years, the middle class, in their wages, and nobody's doing anything about it.
Well,
and you guys continue to want your way or the highway, and you will not work with the Democrats because you want to get Obama out of office, and you will do anything to do it, and no matter how many people.
One of the things that she addressed, I think, is very important that we talk about, and that is this concern that we grow American jobs. Because if we don't, that disparity will continue to increase. And that's why when it comes to regulations, when it comes to tax policies, when it comes to agencies that are overstepping their authority, we've got to make sure that we are back into a position to create those jobs, to push those agencies back to within their legal bounds of authority. Because if we don't, it will continue to depress job creation.
Well, what's your job plan?
We've got several jobs. Passed the Jobs and Energy Permitting Act. I have introduced a small business savings account. There's actually, do we have a handout back there with the job creation measures that I have introduced and co-sponsored? So encourage everybody to take a look at our part and pieces of the job creation plan. When we come back in September, out of the work period, we'll be voting on legislation dealing with the RAINS Act. And the RAINS Act is something that, in Colorado, the legislature actually approves the regulations that the state agencies put forward. It's called the Rule Review Bill. So everybody gets to vote up or down on rules that they think are either a good idea or go too far. And I'm not here to say all rules and regulations are bad. Did you hear the story about the first car crash in New York? There were 2 cars in New York. They crashed. They came up with a regulation for a stop sign. Pretty good idea. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. but anyway, so what? That's a good. So not all are bad. But the RAINS Act would say if you have a regulation of a certain cost, $100 million or more to the economy, then Congress ought to be able to say yes or no to that regulation and make sure that we are actually protecting businesses. Yes, sir.
Hi, Jerry Long. I just wanted to ask why during all these discussions about the debt ceiling was no member of Congress that I recall ever talking about abolishing non-working, non-functioning government agencies. For example, the Department of Energy, they were created 34 years ago. What have they done for 34 years? They were initially set up to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. If you see the price at the pump today, how has that worked out for us? I don't think it's worked at all. They have 16,000 employees. We're paying all their bennies. And they have 100,000 contractors. It's time for them to go. They haven't worked out. Same with the Department of Education.
I think to your point, that's why I introduced the GAO bill, the bill that deals with the report issued by the Government Accountability Office. There are something like 82 different programs within the Department of Education alone that monitor teacher quality. How can we make those programs work better? How can we eliminate some of the duplication in government? There's duplication in the Department of Transportation. Over $100 billion worth of duplication that we ought to be dealing with. And so, yes, question from over here. Yes, sir. In the blue, yes.
You signed Grover Norquist's tax pledge. I was wondering, is there any case that you would not obey that pledge? And in the last 30 years, do you think of any example when you might have voted for increased taxes?
Well, look, I think Grover Norquist doesn't speak for me, doesn't speak for the Republican Party. There are people in this room who certainly disagree with him. And I will tell you this. Had I not signed the Grover Norquist pledge, I would tell you today, even if I hadn't signed it, that I will not increase taxes.
My name is Doug James. I'm here to ask you to join your fellow representatives in co-sponsoring 1351. It's a bill that transfers surplus pension funds to the Postal Service from the Civil Service retirement system to the pre-funding of our retirees' health benefit plan. There's $55 billion that have been paid for by the stamp buyers, which I appreciate. I'm a letter carrier. I am asking that you transfer that money over to the pre-funding of the health benefit plan. It leaves our pension fund under CRS to be fully funded. It fully funds the FERS, and it fully funds our retirees' health benefit plan for the next 41 years. I'm asking that you join the bipartisan support and co-sponsor that. Would you do that for us?
HR 1351?
Yes.
Certainly take a look at it. Thank you. I'd love to see the bill, and do you have that written down? And was that written by, who was the sponsor? Lynch? Okay, yep, we'll take a look at that. Thank you. My grandpa was a rural letter carrier. So thank you. Yes.
Jerry Shepard, constituent and taxpayer from Greeley, Colorado. May I borrow your microphone, please? Thank you. If there is a concern about reducing the deficit, why are we, A, spending all this money in Iraq and Afghanistan, B, spending all this money subsidizing the extractive energies, C, and letting, in essence, the taxpayers are paying for cleanups And you had an opportunity to sponsor HR 492, and I'd like you to revisit that and sponsor that. And also, I would like you to look at 601, which would end subsidies for oil companies. And I think that if we are serious about fiscal prudence, we need to look at things that benefit the extractive industries. And unfortunately, it seems like only the working people, the poor people, and the middle class are the ones that suffer the benefits from this trend towards debt reduction. Thank you. HR 601 and 492.
601 and 492, so we've got it written down, thank you.
Can you tell us what those bills were, though?
I haven't read the bills yet. She said one dealt with cleanup and one dealt with something else.
Jerry's got the bills.
I have the bills written down.
Yeah, so
I'll
we'll
write
get
it
that
down.
Well,
information.
nobody in the audience knows what you look like, Jerry.
Well,
I'm sorry, what was the question? Was there a question
I
there?
wanted clarification on what the bills entailed, so if that's okay.
Yeah, well, the question was about the bills, about co-sponsor them, and we'll take a look. So I don't want to commit to a bill that I haven't read yet. We had that problem 2 years ago. Go ahead.
Regardless of your political affiliation, at some point we need to root for the betterment of all citizens. I'm wondering, in what way are you moving towards the middle or helping to compromise to work with this president in the Senate to find better solutions for our problems? What are you doing to meet them in the middle? When
the President gave his State of the Union address, and Deborah heard the question, what are we doing to work with both sides of the aisle? Are you moving to the middle? What are you doing to move to the middle? And when the President gave his State of the Union address, I sent a letter, we're happy to provide you with a copy of that letter, to the President saying, look, in your State of the Union address, you mentioned several things that I agree with and would like to work with you to accomplish those goals. Things like cutting spending that he talked about in the State of the Union address. Wanted to work with him on that. Things like reform of our tax code that he talked about. Agreed that we ought to look at that. Things like tort reform that he said that he would support in the State of the Union address. Asking him what version of tort reform is he talking about? What would he support? So certainly have done that. The first bill that I introduced, the GAO bill, was with a Democrat member of Congress from Michigan, Gary Peters, and I felt that it was important. My Jobs and Energy Permitting Act that I introduced was co-sponsored by my prime co-sponsor, was a Democrat from Texas. And so certainly working with both sides of the aisle, because like I said, Republicans spend too much money in Congress, Democrats spend too much money in Congress. We've got to get to the point where Republicans and Democrats realize getting back to job creation and slowing the growth of government spending is important together, both.
Here you have your small business savings account.
You gotta yell.
I was looking at your small business savings account legislation summary that you have here. As a founder of small businesses and manager of various businesses, the one thing that I do know is that if you create jobs or expand, you don't pay any income taxes on your profit if it stays in the business. This is allowing people to remove their profit without taxing, and so it's an incentive to not worry about creating jobs. This is tax avoidance. It destroys jobs. I know personally that when personal income tax rates go up, you decide, I will leave the money in the business and make it grow. If personal tax rates come out, I can take the money out and sit on it. This causes people to sit on their money, and it destroys jobs. So why did you vote for it?
First of all, the small business savings account is something that I introduced. I hope that we get a vote on it soon. And the reason why I introduced the bill, I heard from, it's my bill. And so I heard from people like the National Federation of Independent Businesses who support the bill and believe that it would create jobs. We actually heard from economic development groups around the country, and, the local county economic development officers who said this would actually help job creation in our city, in our state. And we heard from other Chamber of Commerces around that said they supported the bill. And so I've had a number of small business owners themselves saying, hey, can I use this? How can we take advantage of it? And what can we do? And it's all about job creation. And the details of the bill are refined so that you actually can't avoid paying taxes. Once you start using it, you have to use it. It limits the amount of money that you can put into it. And if you start using it, then you have to use it within 5 years. There's a number of parameters around it to make sure that it is focused on job creation.
But that's in 5 years from now. We need the jobs now.
We do need the jobs now, you're right, that's why that's not the only bill that I've introduced or the only bill I've co-sponsored, and that's why we'll continue to work. Yes, sir?
My name is Dan Magro, I live in Fort Collins, and all these individual things are of course valid for the people that are bringing them up. But if we take a half a step back, I think the real problem turns out to be producers and parasites. I think the problem is that too many times we're listening to the parasites when we should be listening to the producers. The people that actually want government to
Yes.
And those who make bad choices should have to live with their bad choices, not get bailed out by
Let's make sure that we're staying away from labeling one group or another, and I don't think anybody looks at somebody who's down on their luck or needs the safety nets that we provided as a parasite.
Right.
So we've got to make sure that we're providing those basic safety nets. Yes, sir.
In response to the tax question, I think this person talked about 50% of the so-called poor people in the world pay zero tax. While the rich, so-called rich people that you don't want to have a tax break on, number one, they create jobs. Number two, they pay
All right. The fewer, if we can just make sure we get some more questions, the better conversation we'll have. So yes, sir, you had a question.
First of all, in support of this woman, the top 1% of the population of the United States earns 37% of the income on an annual basis. But that's not my question. Cory, you are a co-sponsor of the Natural Gas Act. The Pickens plan calls for increase of the use of natural gas, and if we converted all of our cross-country hauling trucks to natural gas, they would burn more efficiently, they would have more power, and we would cut our dependence on foreign oil by fully 50%. You pulled your sponsorship under pressure from the Koch brothers, who are your major contributor from Texas. Please respond.
Well, first of all, the second may be your opinion, but it's not true. The second part of your question is not true. The first part, you're exactly right. We have got to do everything we can to produce our own domestic resources. If you look at what's happening in eastern Colorado, if you look at what's happening in Weld County, it's moving to Larimer County, we've got tremendous resources. Natural gas resources, oil resources, wind energy, we've got it all right here in our own backyard. And we ought to be using it. We ought to be using these instead of going over to the Middle East and getting our energy from people who really don't like us. And so what can we do on natural gas? To answer your question specifically, I had a number of manufacturing companies, a number of businesses in the district who came to me, were very concerned about some details of the bill. The potential that it cost about $3 billion was a concern to me. And so I wanted to step back and say, you know what? Let's support natural gas. Let's do everything we can to convert our fleet to natural gas, but let's make sure that we're doing it smart, we're doing it right, and wanted to take some more time to understand the ramifications of the bill on everybody in the district, not just the natural gas producers. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Congressman Gardner, very much appreciate your stand. We face this huge deficit. It's growing every year by at least 7% or more. Has anybody begun talking about a national sales tax devoted solely to amortizing the national debt? If the president wants to spread the pain, then why don't we all share in the pain and pay some sales tax? Let's exclude food and medicine, but let's pay some sales tax, amortize this debt, and get our country back.
There have been a number of ideas out there to reform how we collect taxes in the tax code itself. We ought to take a look at tax reform. There's every idea from what you're talking about. There's the flat tax, the fair tax, and some other ideas that people have mentioned. And I do think we need to take a hard look at how we're doing it. I mean, we've all heard the statistic of how many tens of thousands of pages there are in our tax code. And so we can definitely do it simpler and more fair. Yes?
Hi, Nancy Rumfeld. And I would just like to say that, you know, this whole argument over the debt ceiling, it's really about spending. And the reality is we have a spending problem, not a taxing problem. And this issue should have been addressed quite a while ago. ago, back in the summer of 2010, when the Democrats in charge failed to do a budget. It could have been addressed back then. The issue is we need to address baseline budgeting, which it's not going to stop. You're not going to solve anything until you resolve baseline budgeting, which builds in automatic increases all the time, and everyone needs to share in the cuts. Across the board, the poor, the middle class, the wealthy, and we need to get back to being independent instead of dependent, and that means shrink government.
There's a question right there. Yes, sir.
Okay. This is the current issue of Business Week. To reiterate what this gentleman said, with roughly a third of the nation's wealth controlled by 1% of its citizens. That's the U.S. Also, at an estimated 30.5% of gross domestic product in 2011, the total tax burden on Americans is the lowest among a group of 7 industrial nations. How many in this room would be directly affected by a tax increase for those above $250,000 adjusted gross income?
Yeah, you know,
I don't know anybody.
Could we share $2,000 for the poor and homeless? They're lying. For roads, for libraries?
the statement he made was talking about how many people would be affected by a tax increase that affected you if you earn over $250,000. Is that the right way? And shouldn't some of it be used on other purposes, roads, libraries, other things that you had mentioned? 75% of our country's small businesses are taxed as individuals. Right. Which means that it's a LLC, it's a subchapter, you know, it passes through like you. Over half of them would be affected by a $250,000 or above tax increase.
I wouldn't care.
That's a tax increase on small businesses. I am afraid at this point in our economy would hurt jobs and job creation. Yes. Morning.
I would like to ask how many people there are in this room who are concerned about whether or not there are going to be funds available to pay your Social Security. Yes. An awful lot of us are. The Social Security funds were pulled out of being separate and pulled into the general fund when my congressman, when my Democratic congressman was chairman of the subcommittee on Social Security, and he tried to get them to leave the money alone in Social Security, but it was just too much money sitting there, and they sucked it all into the general fund, and now that's why we have trouble paying for Social Security.
No, we don't have any trouble.
People now or in the future who want to collect Social Security be not able to do that because greed in the past has caused this problem.
What has happened over the past is various trust funds have been used to fund for additional spending and borrowing within government. And the way to make sure that those trust funds aren't raided, so to speak, is to make sure that we balance our budgets and we don't spend more money than we have.
And you owe us that money. The government owes us that money.
And
You borrowed it from us.
that's why we got to stop raiding that money.
And you owed us to pay.
That's why it's got to stop raiding. You're right. That's why government shouldn't spend more money than it has.
You spent it already.
He didn't spend. He wasn't there. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Doug Braden, our association. I know I'm not talking about such a sexy and hot issue, but I'm still talking about the Dodd-Frank bill and the amendments that need to be made to that. The Consumer Financial Protection Agency is at an unprecedented point right now to be able to set precedents for consumers so that people will be able to clearly understand what's going on. If they can take a step back and allow amendment to that Dodd-Frank bill, because if we leave that bill in place right now, I guarantee all of us as homeowners will continue to watch our property values drop because of the inability of people to finance property. So I'd like to, again, to present this language for you, the amendment for 1403 of the Dodd-Frank bill. I'll leave this with Mike Bennett.
Thank you very much. And you reminded me of another bill that I had co-sponsored. It goes back to the gentleman's question earlier about working with both sides of the aisle. And it was a bill called the Capital Access for Main Street. It's a bill that was written by Ed Perlmutter from Colorado. And the idea being this: we're facing a real challenge in our communities when it comes to community banks. In northern Colorado, we have particularly felt the impact of are small hometown banks that have been closed. And so the community access, the capital access for Main Street, which is Ed Perlmutter's bill, would give us a greater chance to help those community banks serve their communities. You know, we're not talking Wells Fargo, we're not talking the big banks, we're talking the local bank on Main Street and how we can make them be more secure in terms of helping us get into homes, what we can do to create our businesses, business loans and others, so we can boost our community. So that's another important one that we should talk about. Yes, sir.
A few moments ago, you did what we like to call double speak, like a lot of elected representatives in Congress, when you said we want to slow the growth of government spending. Slowing the growth is not going to reduce the debt. We got to stop it.
And you know, baseline budgeting is, I believe we're going to have the opportunity in September to vote on zero-based budgeting and to move away from the baseline and move to zero-based budgeting. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm a veteran, 21 years. I'm a disabled vet, and I'm here today. I want to protest what is happening in our government. I think our government has gone to the pot. I think the world is recognizing that. We're letting the things in Europe affect us, and I believe that the people in Washington need to get back to work and do work for the people and not quit playing politics. Thank you.
Nice question.
Absolutely agree. Yes, sir.
Oh, come on. It hurts our cause.
Well, the question was whether, you know, why Big Oil's taking his money and they pay nothing in income taxes. And you know, the bottom line is, we need to take a look at tax reform. Let's do it. Let's make sure it applies to overall comprehensive reform instead of just picking on people that picking on one particular group or another. Yes, sir. With the Navy hat on. Oh, no, right. Well, I'll get to you next. Go ahead.
What else is right? The other day I received something that bothers me. The ACLU. Everybody afraid of? Know what that is? Yeah. You know what they're doing? They're supporting a law that we don't be submissive to the United Nations.
Ladies and gentlemen, just make sure we come from diverse backgrounds with diverse opinions. And the way this country has grown so strong is because we have allowed those diverse backgrounds and opinions to be expressed. And I would just ask that we do it respectfully this morning. A lot of you disagree with what I say and do. A lot of you agree with what I say and do. But let's just make sure that everybody else has their chance to participate. So continue, sir.
But I have here a company that says the ACLU fights to protect the use of foreign law in America's courtrooms. That's what they're doing. So I'm asking, to help reduce the budget of everything, let's take the money that we are supporting ACLU and use it for the privilege of the dead.
Amen.
Yeah, I'm not sure the federal government funds ACLU.
My name is Pete Lister. I'm retired Navy. I live in
Thanks for
Greenwood,
your service as
Colorado.
well.
There you go, sailor. Thank you. I want to point out, when my family got in debt, stopping spending didn't pay the debt at all. I went out and I got a second job.
Yeah. Cory Gardner, I'll get a
Thank you.
second
It's a good job, too. What I want to know is this. If we can save money in this country to balance the budget by reducing Social Security, which, by the way, I already paid for, and by reducing Medicare, which, by the way, I already paid for, when I was making $1,200 a year, they were taking Social Security taxes out. Nobody has ever suggested increasing taxes on the rich or big business. All we have said is, let's take back the special tax breaks that George Bush gave them so that
Yeah, well, and thank you for the question, because I think if you look at those, what you describe as special tax breaks, I think Republicans and Democrats have both been a part of those. And that's why we ought to take a look at comprehensive
That's the problem.
tax reform. Absolutely.
Over here.
Yes, sir. I'll come over here. Thank you. Hey, I'm trying to go to my left, not always to my right. How's that?
This is our left.
That is your left. That is good. Yes, sir. Then I'll come back over.
An article about a month ago was a national story that kind of an interesting set of numbers. You can do a lot with numbers. In the year 2000, these lobbyists received about $800 million to influence people in Washington, from senators to congressmen to committees to all sorts of things. In 2010, it's $10 billion. That says a lot about money influence. So my question to you is, what are you doing to minimize influence so you make reasoned decisions for this district?
Yeah, and I base my decision. Thank you. I base my decision on the Constitution of the 4th Congressional District, what's good for this country, and what I believe to be good for the American people. And that is feedback that I received from you, so thank you for that. And I think we ought to have more transparency, far greater transparency in the system than there is right now when it comes to our campaign finance system. So thank you. Yes, right here.
I'm a 70-year-old Colorado native. My family goes back to the 1800s in Loveland. And I'm frustrated because I voted for you to stand strong. It seems like we always compromise. We on the Republican side compromise.
Let him talk, guys, please.
And I voted for somebody to stand for principles. So my question is, do the people in the Beltway Republicans, have they got so used to just giving in where we can't stand strong for principles?
Well, thank you. And I think, if you're talking about the most recent vote, and I don't know if you are or not, but I mean, here's the most recent vote. I mean, August 2nd, according to any number of business leaders, any number of economists, was a real date. And I don't think we could threaten the economy by failing to come up with a plan by August 2nd. This bill is by no means perfect. It is not the whole apple, it's a small bite of the apple, and we need to do more. But I did not want to wake up on August 3rd knowing that we had let a very important date to our nation's business pass without anybody doing anything. That was a bipartisan vote. So thank you.
Do the Beltway Republicans, I'll use that, have they got so used to that not being able to stand up?
If they don't come home and don't get out of the district, that place can suck you in. That's why I am here listening to you, so thank you. Yeah, back to back. We'll come to you next. How's that? Go ahead.
First of all, thanks for coming here. I represent Gardner. I'm an independent voter. Before Collins, I voted for you last time, basically on your platform for fiscal responsibility. I've been really pleased with the kind of momentum in Congress for fiscal responsibility because it's needed. But one of the things that really bothered me, and everyone can agree that, and I'm sure you can too, is that whole round before August 2nd. It was a circus act on both sides. Very disappointing, Republicans or Democrats. But what really bothers me is I want to see fiscal responsibility, but not even one person, not one bill in the House came out with closing the corporate loopholes for oil companies. We're asking Americans to make hard choices, whether it be entitlement changes or simple changes. But corporate loopholes or loopholes for an oil company, sir, how could you not suggested that or been on the platform as here we are in this district hurting willing middle-class citizens willing to make sacrifices, but yet oil companies are making record profits. We're suffering, and there's not a voice for us.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's why we talk about tax reform, but also that's the budget that passed the House a couple of months ago.
Not to interrupt you, but I didn't hear talk. I wanted action. I wanted leadership.
Yeah, the budget bill that passed 2 months ago actually addressed the closing a lot of those loopholes and began tax reform. That passed the House. So thank you.
How did it address it?
Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Dennis McClatchy, and I received a word recall from you recently in which you said that you wanted to protect our Medicare. I'd like to know how you plan to do that when you voted for the Paul Ryan budget, which basically puts seniors on a voucher program. Also, again, stubbornly refused to go back to the tax levels that we had under Clinton, which we know created jobs, gave us a balanced budget, and left us with $236 billion in surplus.
Well, you're incorrect about the Medicare, ending Medicare.
I said put it on vouchers.
That's not true. And so if you want to end Medicare, do nothing. Because the plan that passed under the health care bill took $500 billion out of Medicare, and it created the IPAB board, the Independent Payment Advisory Board, which will make a lot of decisions, taking it out of your hands and giving it to basically a board that's very high paid with very long with unlimited terms. And so you've got the IPAB board with very long terms, very high, comfortable six-figure salaries, making decisions.
So you support the Paul Ryan bill?
I supported a plan to protect and preserve Medicare for people. Medicare will be bankrupt if we do nothing. This from the chief actuary of Medicare, the Treasury Department. Medicare, if we do nothing, will be bankrupt in 9 to 13 years. It will be bankrupt in 9 to 13 years. The only way that we are going to save it and preserve a safety net program is if we take responsible reform and actions to make sure that it remains in place. Yes, sir.
From Loveland. Can you explain to us why the Congress has not been able to pass a budget for the last couple of years? What's it going to take now to get some kind of budget on record so we know what in the world we're doing? All I know is that our bills are going up.
Yeah, and the question is how come we haven't passed a budget for the past several years? It's been over 800. The House has passed a budget. Just several months ago, the House passed a budget. The Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 800 days. And so I mean, it's over 800 days since they haven't. We built the Pentagon in less time than it's taken the Senate to pass a budget. And so without both houses doing it, then you end up in a situation where you can't get the budget through, and that's so unfortunately it's hung up there. So thank you. And there's a question right here that I told somebody I'd get back to next, and I didn't, so I apologize. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Chuck Peterson. I've been a precinct committeeman. I've been an election judge.
One moment, please.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I've been a precinct committeeman and know a little bit about politics. I've been an election judge for 15 to 20 years. And here's my question to you. You're all for local energy, and I am too. But what about knowing what's in the chemicals for fracking? Yeah. And what about blowing the tops of mountains off to get the coal? Can you do, or will you do, anything about these two items?
Yeah, and I believe that actually decisions on fracking ought to be regulated at the state level. Disclosure ought to be regulated at the state level. And the past couple of days, there have been reports in both the Denver Post and some other local media outlets that talked about a plan at the state legislature to require disclosure of what's in fracking fluid. And so I think that's going to happen at the state level. And I don't know if you heard John Hickenlooper say, John Hickenlooper basically said there's no way that the chemicals that are in fracking fluid would contaminate water. That's what John Hickenlooper said. That's in the paper, so you can read it in the paper. I'm not making that up, so you just read it in the paper. Yeah. And the second part about mountaintop mining, in Colorado we don't do mountaintop mining. So.
Can't there be a
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. I can't believe you
Call
picked
me Cory, please.
Okay.
Or whatever other choice word, you know.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to know, I don't know about in D.C. and Congress, but I hear this great sucking sound that Ross Perot used to talk about. I work for a company that has 90,000 employees, and every year that shrinks to being a smaller amount of Americans who get laid off and more overseas. Right now, I need to be trained to learn some new technology, and they're training people in Vietnam, and I'm really scared, and I want to know what you're going to do to keep, so that I can keep paying Colorado taxes rather than become a ward of your state.
Thank you. Well, and that goes back to a pretty fundamental thing. We need more taxpayers in this country, not higher taxes in this country. And by helping people create jobs and opportunity, we will make sure that we
Shipping overseas.
So what can we do about it? We can make sure that we have regulations that promote local business. Yeah, I got a phone call from a businessman in Denver, and he said his #1 competitor just went overseas to take advantage of some of the lower taxes that they had overseas. And so
wages.
Hang on. And there may have been a number of reasons why he did that. But the fact of the matter is, he was left then with the choice: does he go over there, or does he stay here, knowing that he can no longer compete? And so, how do we create a business environment? We need to create a business environment that actually starts creating American jobs. We do it with energy. The Jobs and Energy Permitting Act would create 54,000 jobs, high-paying jobs.
But what about my job? I want to keep it, not new jobs. I want to keep my
job. Make sure that your business is successful. We need to make sure.
No, they're
successful by training those Vietnamese in what I want to learn.
Well, and then
I can't. They make me work 45 hours a week, and they don't pay for training anymore. They used to pay for 2 weeks of training every year. They quit paying for training 3 years ago, but they're training 2 weeks. They're giving these people technology. They're giving them what I want to know, and I don't have time to learn.
And they get.
Well, they won't give you the time.
No, I have to work 45 hours.
Well, to go back to the question. If that company can succeed, then I would hope that they would share with their success with you. If they're not, then that's not a great company to work for.
But they've got 90,000 employees.
You're done, Alice. Sit
Yes,
down.
sir. Everybody box away.
Good job, Alice.
Why are you exporting American jobs and then turn around and give these companies a tax credit for it?
That's why we came up with the ideas on the bills, the list of bills that you see, to create American jobs. To make sure that we are creating those jobs right here.
I'm tired of calling.
Well, I'd have to look at what tax credit you're talking about. So happy to get the information to some folks in the back. So thank you. Ed.
Cory, thank you. The IRS reported in 2008 that the top 5% of income earners pay 59% of the tax. The bottom 50% pay 2.7% of the collected income tax. It's not a tax problem, it's a spending problem. We're staying constitutional, and with the majority of people who've sent you to Washington to keep your finger on the spending. One other thing, if we want more jobs in America, all we got to do is reduce the corporate income tax rate.
Let's just step back again. And when people present these different ideas, sometimes the same thing happens in Congress. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dolores Williams. Thank you for coming and listening to us. 50,000 factories went overseas during the Bush administration, and they were given tax credits to move. You know, it's a business expense to go over there. 50,000 factories went overseas, and we've got to bring them back. Small businesses have not been able to keep up. So we need tariffs. We need to stop. When we have federal money to spend, please, it's got to be spent here, and that will require factories to come back here, because we can't buy China, etc. The only way to get factories back here are for the federal government to have a rule that you cannot buy and take our money overseas. Thank you. What will you do about it?
Sure. Yeah, and I believe in the free market, and that if you increase tariffs, then it will have negative effects on any other number of goods in the market. If you look at some of the actions that Russia, China, other nations have taken, whether it's a tariff on some products, there's been many trade issues that a tariff was placed on one product and something completely unrelated to it as a retaliation, tariffs were placed on the other products by the other nation. And so I think that the way we help consumers in this country is by having choice and making sure that we have a number of opportunities to go out and seek those goods that we want for ourselves and our families. And that means that we have to rely on a free market. Now, the other thing that I think we've got to do is to make sure that our business environment in this country is conducive to creating jobs. Because we can't dictate to there's $2 trillion worth of capital that's sitting on the bankrolls of businesses around this country right now. And it's sitting there, and they're not investing it in this country creating jobs. Why? Because they don't know what's going to happen here with the policies of this nation over the next several years. And so they're holding on to that money and they're not spending it. And so how can we make sure that our regulatory environment, our energy policies are such that they say, you know what, let's do business here, because I believe, as you believe, this is the best country on the face of this earth. And when we can make it happen for them, they'll create those jobs here. They won't go overseas. Yes, sir.
It really came without the intention of asking a question, but I'm amazed that no one has addressed an issue that's in the news constantly, and that's the 30 SEALs who recently lost their lives in our 3 wars. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not Bush's, but Obama's in Libya right now at $1 million a cruise missile. What is Congress's responsibility in these 3 wars?
I believe we need to make sure that we are finding a way to get out of Afghanistan, that we are finding our way to finish in Iraq. We have to do it responsibly. We have to make sure that we're not jeopardizing our men and women in uniform. And my heart goes out and my prayers, and I know every person in this room's heart goes out to the families of those soldiers that were killed in that chopper. Sailors. You got a Navy guy. Where's he at? There he is. But I mean, so the SEAL team, 6, the people who were on that chopper. I mean, my heart goes out to them, and that we owe our obligation is to make sure that they have the resources they need to finish and do their job. But we've got to, as Congress, make sure that we are looking at the end game and saying, all right, how do we do this responsibly to protect our country and to protect the interest of our men and women in uniform? When it comes to Libya, I have voted to end the action in Libya because I have yet to receive a justification. Senator Lundberg.
Yes. Thank you, Congressman Gardner. I want to commend you for conducting this meeting in a very courteous and careful fashion. It's obviously been loaded with a lot of extreme opinions, and yet you have the courage and the forthrightness to stand up and talk to every citizen that comes to your town hall. You didn't usher us in groups of 20 with pre-prepared questions. I appreciate that. It's not a question, it's a comment, it's a commendation. Keep it up, you're doing a good job.
My husband and I are owners of a small business, and you keep talking about creating jobs for the small business. Unless I have a demand for the service that we provide, it's not going to create any more jobs. We're not going to hire any more people. Why do you think that just giving tax breaks and things and that big corporations, it isn't corporations that create the jobs, it's the demand for either the product or the service. And why do you say that it's the corporations that create jobs? It's the demand, and unless people in this room demand their service or their product, it's not going to create jobs. We need to create jobs through getting back lower taxes for the corporations. I mean, why give them all the breaks? They're not spending that money on us or on other things. They're holding on to it. If we had the money, we would spend it because we have to for food and products and cars and other things. It's the demand that creates the job, not corporations.
The majority of our our job creators are small businesses. That's the majority of our job creators are small businesses. And so how do we create demand? Demand, people don't just come up with demand. They don't wake up one morning and say, I demand. They have to have good jobs. We got to create jobs. Where do those jobs come from? It's the ability for employers to hire new people or an individual to create their own job and opportunity. There's a great business in Fort Collins. There's a great business in Fort Collins where somebody actually came up. He walked in. He had one of his managers of one of his restaurants come in, and he saw her wearing. I think this was in the paper, Bob, a couple of weeks ago, and it was she was wearing a little feather in her hair. And he said, "Wow, that's kind of neat. Where'd you get that?" And she explained it to him, and she told him. He says, "You know, you think that's going to take off? Is that a popular trend?" And she said, "Well, I don't know." And so he did the research on it. He went and did a whole bunch of research trying to decide whether or not that was something that he should look into. And how many people fly fishing here? Have you been to the fly store lately and seen the price of a fishing fly? All right. Well, he figured out that if you could buy these feathers and sell them to people, he could buy them for pennies on the dollar, turn around and sell them for $1 or $2, and he could make a strong business. That's the innovation and entrepreneurship that this country was built upon. That created jobs, and the people who want that decided because they wanted to buy his goods. He's creating jobs, they're happy, and how do we make sure that we have a nation of job creators?
And that began with the ability to buy.
Excuse me, I am concerned that this government is too concerned making regulations that destroy jobs. And I don't think that's what we got. This is the last question, but let me just say this. If you have a question, please contact the folks in the back, and we'll try to get the questions answered as soon as we can. Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't have a question, I got a statement about a word that I don't like, referring to Social Security and Medicare, and that's entitlement.
Yes.
I've been working over 50 years. I'm 69, so I started when I was 15. And nobody asked me if I wanted to be participating. So I'm going to tell you what an entitlement is. It's the lifelong benefits we give Congress and senators. We give the illegal aliens. And it's the benefits we give these crooked nations that turn around and shoot at us and kill our children because we send them over there and give them rules of engagement. Those are entitlements. And one more, I got a quote from my wife to tell your boss, the Speaker of the House, congratulations, you moron, you just put Obama in for 4 more years.
Well, anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here, and thank you very much for your participation and engagement today. Thanks. Thank you.
That's hysterical. Let's go to work. Uh-oh.
But I think it's very poor manners to come back and put somebody's face right in front of it. So I call
Your face was never in there. I was looking at the speaker.
I couldn't tell that. But